Hello friends, I'm Kostub and today we are here to discuss the Economic Survey Volume 1 2020. Here, first we'll discuss chapter 1, which is titled as Wealth Creation, the Invisible Hand Supported by the Hand of Trust. Now let us discuss the most important points contained in this chapter 1 of Economic Survey. Here you can see in the figure it's a gold coin that was used as trade between India and Rome, right, in the ancient times. Let us see India's contribution to the world GDP in ancient times. It was nearly, see, pre-British era, in the beginning of the 19th century, it is believed that India's contribution to world GDP was nearly around 5 to 20%. So, 15 to 20% contribution, India had a great role to play in world trade. Next, the uh, evidence for India's prosperity in the past and wealth creation was also advocated by Kautilya's Arthashastra. Even the work of Tamil poet Tiruvalluvar, that is Tirukural in Tamil Nadu, that also advocates creation of wealth. But what is important here? This wealth has to be created in a manner that is ethical. Now, present arguments for wealth creation. So, in the past, we have seen that the survey says that yes, pre-British era, ancient India was prosperous. Ancient and medieval times, we were dealing in trade with the rest of the world, and in a quantity that was much higher than what we do today. Apart from that, Kautilya's Arthashastra and Thiruvallar's work also highlight this participation of India and wealth creation. Now, presently, if you see, the government and the survey tries to argue for wealth creation on what grounds? First is sovereignty. So, if you are able to create wealth, right, your sovereignty can be protected. Your military is backed by your economy. Then the country becomes stronger. Second, liberalization. So, post liberalization period, survey gives evidence that after 1991, after liberalization was embraced by India, what happened is the growth of India and Indian economy, Indian manufacturing sector, services sector saw a massive leap after 1991. Third argument is about Sensex. So even if you observe the NSE and BSE and the way they have increased in the past, you can see that since 1991 the growth has been phenomenal, and that too, one thing that can be noted is the uh, time required for doubling of the census. Right, it's like coronavirus, right? That initially it takes a lot of time to double the number of patients, but then subsequently with every division, what happens is the number of patients goes on doubling in very short period of time. The time gap goes on reducing. That is what has been observed in the case of Sensex in India, right? And so it is clearly seen that after 1991 companies have prospered, people have prospered, Sensex has doubled its value in short period of time. Next is last argument is social welfare. That we have seen, right, that if the government can create, the economy can create wealth, that wealth can be redistributed in the people to ensure social welfare. So these are the 4 points on the basis of which we can argue, or the survey argues, for wealth creation in the country. Next, here look at the correlation of wealth creation with social welfare. So wealth creation gives better taxes. The taxes can be direct taxes or indirect taxes, and here what it results into is social expenditure of the government increases, resulting into further generation of welfare, or further effect is welfare of people. So government is able to spend more for those at the bottom of the pyramid. The invisible hand. Now the survey says that we have to believe in the invisible hand. So as I discussed in the part introduction lecture before this, that our relation with socialism has more about come to an end, where we are moving more towards wealth creation in the economy using capitalist mode. So here, remove obstructions to economic activity. So survey says that, what does this invisible hand mean? The government is supposed to remove obstructions to economic activity in the Indian economy. Here the role of private sector is also highlighted. It has been seen that survey shows through a diagram that if you see the growth of credit, or the role played by private sector in banking or in other areas like telecom, you will see that post liberalization, the generation of profit, employment generation, has gone increasing after 1991 at a rate which is much higher than the rate earlier. So private sector has seen a prominent role after liberalization, and that is what the invisible hand is all about. Next, enabling economic choice for economic players. So Strengthening the invisible hand also means that you have to, this word is important, like economic choice, that is opportunity. So different players or stakeholders in the economy, if they are given an opportunity, choice, so equal playing field, level playing field, that is what it is. It also means restriction on the role of government in the economy, and this interventionism, if it goes down, then again invisible hand can be strengthened. Now, what are the evidences here? First, I mean, survey says that in India, if you observe the sectors which were liberalized or made open for private sector and the sectors which were closed till date, there is distinct gap seen between the two. So here, evidences are: first, domestic credit growth. So for example, if you see the banking industry, you understand that every economy requires a strong banking industry for credit supply. Here in India, post liberalization, we see that the growth of credit has been better with the participation of private banks or private sector into the banking area. Today, we acknowledge that our banking sector is majorly affected by non-performing assets. Now, if you see NPAs, the proportion of NPAs is much higher in public sector banks, and then public sector banks are riddled with inefficiency. So here, domestic credit growth, which is important for Indian economy to become a 5 trillion economy that we plan by 2025, it is necessary to open the banking sector to make it more transparent and bring in more private players into the banking sector to ensure growth of credit, which would be commensurate or proportionate to the size of Indian economy. Second, performance of ports. Here also the survey gives us evidence that if you observe certain ports which are private, which are smaller ports or minor ports, and then the major ports which have been in control of government completely, you see the difference. The dry weight tonnage. So the increase in traffic, increase in profits, increase in activity, economic activity has been more in the case of private controlled ports than the public sector controlled ports. So here, one thing you need to understand, that we are not arguing for complete privatization, but we cannot deny the role of private players in increasing the efficiency of resource use in Indian economy, right? So that is what we are highlighting, and that is what the survey is highlighting. Next, survey also points out the difference between the growth of steel and coal sector. You are aware that the steel sector is open to private players. However, coal till recently was completely in control of government. CIL was the only authority, Coal India Limited, to which was allowed to use that resource, or mining was carried out only by CIL. So here also you see that the growth of steel sector has been much higher and much faster as compared to the growth of coal sector. Lastly, the difference is between the rail and road freight growth. So transport sector we are comparing. In the survey, it has been mentioned that if you look at the transport sector of India, ideally we know that over a very long distance, water is cheaper. Water transport, waterways. Next comes railways, then comes roadways. Right? If you keep the aviation part aside for the consideration of freight transport, water is most cheaper, then rail, and then road. However, if you observe the transport sector in India with a vis-a-vis this freight transport, you will notice that more than 65% of freight transport of India and nearly 80% of passenger traffic runs only on roads and not rails. So this is inefficient because it takes more time, it creates more carbon emissions, which is not sustainable, and also it leads to a lot of accidents and delays, and uh, creates structural bottlenecks for our economy. Why has rail transport not done complete that well? Road transport sector has been open to private players, but then rail sector or railway, Indian railways, is completely in public sector only. Now, if you observe the Vivek Debroy committee report, which came a couple of years ago, that was clearly mentioned in the report that we need to open up the railway sector, at least in the case of operations, bit by bit, on at least on experimental basis. We have to move slowly, but we have to move towards introduction of private players or their operations and services into the railways, Indian railways. That will make railway transport uh, achieve its potential that it is capable of. So here also the survey points out that we clearly see the evidence for more efficiency vis-a-vis participation of private players. The next point uh, is what steps we can take, right? So first, uh, step one, this is the first level of solutions: provide equal opportunities for new entrants. So we understand that government is creating space in the Indian economy for startups. So we need to bring the startups into the economy. Why? Because these startups result into what? Creative destruction. These are, if you allow the new companies to come in, these new companies can bring in price efficiency, they can bring in more innovation, they can bring in newer products and better products. And these, because of their innovative tech and creative technologies, can also create creative destruction, whereas the larger firms which were in the market create inefficiencies, right, because of their large structure and inefficiency, in the case that they have control over the entire market. And so they do not allow or do not change as per the demand of the market so easily. So here, provide equal opportunities for new entrants. So these new entrants would help into creative destruction. That is what we are saying. Second, enable fair competition. Now this is also very important, because if an economy does not allow fair competition, what happens? The already entrenched large players in the economy do not allow space for growth of the new players. Now, for example, if you see, Facebook is a national, big multinational in social sector, social media, right? And now if this space is to be occupied by a new company, so there is a new startup which also offers such a platform. But do you really believe that it would be easy for it to displace Facebook? It's difficult unless it is exceptionally better and offers something very innovative as compared to Facebook. So that space in Indian economy can be allowed only when there is a fair competition between the different players or competitors in the economy. So government needs to be a very, very good referee in that case. Lastly, this slide speaks about ease of doing business. So the economic survey has also highlighted that in ease of doing business, India has been doing well. But if you observe the trajectory till 2014, the ease of doing business, India did not rank too well. After 2014, the progress has been significant. So the World Bank's doing business rankings, India 2014, India was at 142. Today it is 63 in 2019. So this has been a significant improvement from 142 in 2014 to 63 rank in 2019. However, uh, despite the fact that India has been recognized as one of the 10 economies that have improved the most, the survey clearly highlights certain areas where India continues to trail consistently, like ease of starting a business, registering property, paying taxes, enforcing contracts. These are the four major areas where India is lagging. So, survey also highlights certain steps that need to be taken. We'll be dealing with them later. So, ease of doing business, government has to really promote very seriously. The second level of steps that can be taken here, we need to bring a pro business policy, and this has to be differentiated from pro crony policies. Now, we have seen in the past session, the first session, that private property, profit, and capital was considered evil or criminal in Indian context since independence. However, we have to differentiate a pro business government or pro business policy from pro crony policy. So when we speak about pro crony policies, it means what? Here, the entrenched players, large players in the economy, get undue benefit because of their political connections, and they lead to inefficiency in resource use and resource allocation, and then cost or price of the product in the market also goes on increasing. When we speak about pro business policy, it means the policies which make it easy to start a business, operate a business, compete equally with other players in the economy, right? So ease of doing business, we need pro business policies which will support this innovation, support creative destruction, allow dynamic firms to grow. This will also result into uh, generation of employment in the Indian economy, right? So this pro business policies are needed rather than pro crony policies. Second, we need to avoid government intervention where it is not necessary. So here the example has been given of pharma sector. So it has been seen that government's intervention into pharma sector to control prices has clearly resulted into what? It has resulted into wherever government tries to go for price control, it has been observed that government regulated formulation, what are the formulations are used in pharma sector? Government regulated formulation prices increase more than unregulated formulations. Also, the supply of unregulated formulations is more than that of regulated formulations. So just to cut the story short, wherever government intervenes unnecessarily two things government has in mind: either it is cost or supply. Both ends, it has been observed in the pharmaceutical industry that if government intervenes unnecessarily, the price also increases, right? Wherever it is regulated, price increases, supply decreases, right? Supply is rigid, inflexible. So this is through unnecessary intervention, government goes for creating inefficiency in the economy, and that has to be prevented. This is the pharmaceutical sector's example we have already discussed. Next, in third step, what we can say: enable trade for job creation. So ultimately, government wants what? When we spoke about in the introduction last session, that we want prosperity, and this prosperity has to percolate down to the bottom of the pyramid. But when we say we need prosperity which percolates to the bottom of pyramid, this is only possible when people ethically earn this money by being active and productive members of participants of economy. So this is possible only when they have jobs. So we need trade for job creation, which will allow the percolation of wealth at the bottom of the pyramid, right? So pro business again, focus on growth in exports. Now here also we know that we have been running a scheme called Make in India, but then survey advocates that we need to integrate assemble in India into Make in India. So India, see, you must recall that Raghuram Rajan, who was the governor of RBI, he had made a comment that we not only need Make in India, but we also need uh, Make for India. So what he said is, Make in India is an export led, it's a model of export led growth. But then today, if you look out, especially in the context of this present lockdowns everywhere, the global economy may not be ready for another China. So what we have to do is, we cannot just insist always that you have to make in India. What we have to do is, till now we have seen that companies manufacture in their countries and many things are assembled in India. So growth in exports, we have to focus on exports, no doubt, but we have to focus on domestic market also, we have to focus on exports also. But here what can be done is, we need to integrate assemble in India into Make in India. So, Make in India can be more broader, more flexible to allow for import of materials. So, what is it hinting at? It is hinting at being a participant in the global value addition chains, right? So, this is called network products, right? Survey uses a term called network products. So, even budget speaks about it. So, India needs to participate into production of such network products where we assemble in India for the world. So assemble in India and Make in India, both have to go hand in hand. Next, uh, rightly pointed out, survey says that labor intensive industries need support. So sectors like leather, sectors like textiles, right, electronics, all these have to be promoted actively in the country to enable creation of productive jobs. Lastly, what is given in the survey? Survey says that efficiently scale up the banking sector. Now, as argued earlier, any economy can grow as long as there is a banking sector which is backing it properly, right? This is clearly seen in the examples of US and China. See, the support of US banking system in making US an economic superpower is well documented. In the 80s, during the heydays of Japanese economy, Japan had 15 of the top 25 large banks then. Today also, if you see, China is an economic superpower. It has been ably supported by its banks. The top four largest banks globally today are all Chinese banks. The largest bank in the world, that is Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, is nearly two times as big as the fifth or sixth largest bank, which are Japanese and American. So imagine the scale of banking sector, and then you understand why the government is consistently promoting consolidation in banking sector so as to make banks too big to fail, right? Even when Raghuram Rajan sir was governor of RBI, he had used a term that called DSIBs, right? So domestically, systemically important banks. So we need to create banks which are large and which can take on this global competition. However, unfortunately, if you look at India, India's banking sector is disproportionately underdeveloped now. As of now, India has only one bank in global top 100 banks, right? Only one bank in top 100. Countries like Sweden and Singapore, which are very, very small, they have thrice the number of global banks as in India. Even the public sector banks in India, they account for 70% of the market share in Indian banking, which is not very good, because the public sector banks are considered to be inefficient, and survey speaks about it. So we need to move out of this mindset, and we need to create a strong, efficient banking sector which can stand up to the global competition. Next, the public sector banks, they are riddled with inefficiency. And what we need to do is we need to implement the recommendations of various committees like PJ Nayak committee report, which focused on the issue of governance in public sector banks. So these banks need to be made modern and competitive, so that they can efficiently support and back up the growth of Indian economy. And lastly, we also need to focus on the role of shadow banks. Shadow banks are the non-banking financial companies which are not subject to strict regulation. These are like financial institutions which provide credit. And you are very well aware that presently shadow banks have been in news because of their role into this NPA crisis. Also, the shadow banks have emerged very, very important players in Indian market, which fill the gap for credit which is available to various economic players like corporates and companies. So we also need to take care of this shadow banks in Indian economy if we have to become 5 trillion economy by 2025. Next, ultimately the survey, this chapter speaks about trust as a public good. So see, we understand that we are looking at invisible hand. Socialism is cast aside. However, when we say trust, there's this Adam Smith's, what he has given in Wealth of Nations in 1776, invisible hand, that is the market forces of supply and demand. Economic survey says that we know that when we speak about capitalism or private players, markets are liable to debase ethics in the pursuit of profit at all cost. Right, markets are liable to debase ethics in pursuit of profit at all cost. So what we need is we need to build trust as a public good that gets enhanced with greater use. So here the economic survey is speaking about the role of virtue and regulation by rituals. So virtues, rituals, ethics in economics, so as to ensure that economic players operate on the basis of trust, and this trust should not be lost. Otherwise, we see what happens when the trust is lost. 2008 financial crisis, then the present NPAs in India, then the loan waivers. All these are cases where the players in economic system do not value the role of ethics, and they do not repay, right, what they have borrowed. So this results into the other players of the market, the risk is transferred to other players, and these other players become wary of operating in your economic space because their rights are not respected. So it has a cascading impact. This also can be related, as I have already said in the first session introduction, that it is related to even market failure, it is related to corruption. All these economic aspects are based on trust. So here, what economic survey argues, that we need to follow Aristotle, who says that good laws make good citizens, and it is not just good laws. People become upright when guided by virtue and regulated by ritual rather than by just orders and penalties. So here, in the recent context, what can be highlighted? The global financial crisis, 2008, then corruption perception index by Transparency International. It also ranks various economies on the basis of their uh, transparency and good governance. Then loan defaults and audit failures, this is clearly seen and highlighted by economic survey also, that this defaults, like, and that not just defaults, this willful defaults are problematic. So who are willful defaulters? The people who do not repay but have the capability to repay, but still they do not. So these willful defaults are very problematic. And then role of audit firms or audit failures are also very significant, because this is like opportunistic behavior of a few unscrupulous promoters or players in the economy. This incentivizes even more corporates to willfully default on their loan obligation. So what happens is, once one default is allowed, many perform the same things, right? And then it has a very bad impact on the overall culture of economy. So willful defaulters ultimately lead to burden on taxpayers, right? Because they have to be bailed out, right? So this loan defaults and audit failures both are highlighted in economic survey as big drawbacks of lack of trust in the operation of economy. So what does the survey say? How do we enable trust? See, invisible hand of market needs supporting hand of trust. How this trust can be cultivated? Avoiding policies that crowd out intrinsic motivation. This means, for example, there is a company which has borrowed certain amount of money. That company repays the loan in the given period of time. So because it is a good player and it behaves responsibly in giving back the loan principal as well as interest, the banks should not incentivize these companies by giving them lower rates of interest or better loans in future. Because if you do that, what would happen? It would crowd out intrinsic motivation. So you can, what you can do is you can make things easier for them to operate. But then if you incentivize right, what will happen here? Such gestures should not be accompanied by economic incentives like greater credit limit or reduction in interest for award winners. Otherwise, the award winning behavior in the short term may be perceived as ingratiation for better future credit availability, that is future economic gains. And this will be problematic because it will crowd out intrinsic motivation out of that players. So what we are saying is, if you have to build trust in economy, any behavior, the behavior of any player in the economy, if it is good, trustworthy, you should not give extra leverage economically. What it will do? It will remove that element of trust, because the other party would start expecting from you, like it's like quid pro quo, right? And then the trust would be lost ultimately. Next, survey says that reducing information asymmetry to reduce opportunism. What is information asymmetry? Right? It is like if the information is not shared properly. Now, just imagine that there were certain banks from which Kingfisher Group, Vijay Mallya, took loans using the same property as mortgage. Now, that's not allowed in Indian banking system. But there was no horizontal transfer of information in real time. So because of that, what happens is many a times we have seen that NPA is built up because of this reason, that one player or one company takes loan from one bank and then defaults and then applies in another bank and takes loan again and defaults later. But the second default could have been prevented if the first bank would have shared information with others and the particular borrower is red flagged initially only. So this information asymmetry results into opportunistic behavior, which further results into reduction in trust in the economy. So we need to take steps to ensure, for example, central repository of information on large corporates. This has been done uh, around 2014-15. So what happened? This is because this is then horizontal transfer of information, which prevents opportunistic behavior. Even where banks share this information, tag the defaulter as willful or genuine, then all these steps will help in reducing opportunistic behavior. And ultimately, quality of supervision over entire economy, not only banking sector but entire economy matters, because government is supposed to be a good referee, right? A neutral referee. So if, like willful defaults, malpractices like financial misreporting, market manipulation needs to be detected early. And this is possible only when government strengthens the institutions which are regulators in the economy. So regulators, we need better manpower, we need better technology. So regulators like Competition Commission of India, RBI, SEBI, right, all these need better manpower and better technology. So if there is artificial intelligence used, big data used, then trained manpower is made available, right, then it is possible that effectiveness will increase of regulation, and government will be able to play a role of a quality and efficient referee in the Indian economy. So ultimately, what survey this chapter, wealth creation, the invisible hand supported by hand of trust, highlights? It is make money. There is no weapon sharper than it to sever the pride of your foes. This is Tirukural. So this chapter was about a complete summary of what the survey is all about in the first part, and it says clearly that wealth creation is important. This redistribution of wealth comes later, but first we should focus on creating wealth in economy. But creating wealth, you need not forget that while creating wealth, we need to focus on ethics, because if the wealth is created by using unethical means, then in long run it's going to hurt your economy and take it back by decades. So with this, I end this session, and I request you to subscribe to this channel and comment in the comment section. Thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe.